The time has come for the Cobra to rise up and reveal himself.
Welcome back, my quiver of capitalists, to AP Economics, presented by Cobranomics, your all-American history teacher, gold standard of economics, le champion of classical liberalism, and sensei of supply side, Professor G here, and welcome to Unit 5, the Federal Reserve System, the money supply, and money. In this unit, we are going to take a look at the other economic institution of our country, the Federal Reserve System, and the role it plays in the importance of money in our country, the money supply, and how it works with the federal government to correct economic shocks. So first, let's take a look at, so for today's lesson we're going to take a look at our introduction to the Federal Reserve System, kind of the historical circumstances that, briefly the historical circumstances that created it, and we're going to take a look at its first role in the money supply, its role over the money supply. So, to be the greatest country in the world, and to let anyone tell you different, that is America, you need a stable form of currency and a banking system. Alexander Hamilton knew it, and when he was created, when he was pushing for a national bank, the Bank of the United States, and his first Secretary of the Treasury, and that has been true ever since. To be a truly industrial country, that you need a stable currency and a stable banking system. Bizarrely though, America did not have that for portion of our history. We had a very on and off and fluid banking system and currency system. And for the last 100 or so years though, now we have the Federal Reserve System. But first let's take a look at some historical circumstances that led to the creation of the banking system we know today. So first, we have the Bank of the United States, the BUS, from 1791 to 1811, and the BUS was actually created much like the Bank of England. It was a decentralized hybrid system of private banks, and it was meant to be the central bank, the banker's bank of the United States, where other banks can go, and a bank that could work with the federal government to handle national debt and tax collection. Its charter expires in 1811 on a tie vote, and then it is rechartered as the second bank of the U.S. from 1816 to 1836. That charter is vetoed by Andrew Jackson, and for this large period of American history, from 1836 to 1913, this is the free bank era, where there are only state banks. In 1862, to help fight the American Civil War, Abraham Lincoln passes two very important acts that finally put our currency on the right direction, because aside from the Continentals, which were not worth that much, the U.S. only issued, so the U.S. government during this whole period, kind of bizarrely, only issued gold and silver. So gold and silver was only issued by the United States government, and so each bank had its own bank notes. So that means there was essentially a different currency based only on the faith of that bank that issued those notes. So not a very reliable system. To fight the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln passes two acts, the Legal Tender Act and the National Bank Act. And these acts introduced the first quote-unquote greenbacks, the first kind of version of the modern dollar, which will appear, and also starts the creation of national banks, larger banks that are approved by the national government to start to try to take some control over the banking system. But it is still not a perfect system, and during this banking system, because there was so little faith in banks, recessions turned into depressions because of what was called the bank run. People would be scared that their bank would go out of business, and they would run to the bank and withdraw all of their money from the bank. And sometimes if you didn't get to the bank quickly enough, you lost your money because banks lend money out to make a profit off of them. So sometimes, and there was no FDIC then, Federal Deposit Insurance Commission, by corporation, made under the New Deal, and so banking was bizarrely not a safe system in the United States. So recessions turned into depressions as they were accompanied by bank failures. Banks lending out too much money, people rushing to the banks to get their money, banks lending to each other. It was not a stable system, and there was no central bank or banker's bank that banks could reliably go to. And seemingly every 10 to 20 years, 1837, 1857, 1872, 1892, 1901, 1907, you had, double check those dates, they're all correct, you had recessions turn into massive panics, bank runs, and depressions. And thankfully in the 1901 and 1907 panics, that if it wasn't for J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller actually did not want to take the credit, but J.P. Morgan had to go to John D. Rockefeller for extra money to bail out the banking system. So banks were, the banking situation in America was precarious. Yet despite this, we still verged into the most industrialized nations thanks to the men who built this country, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Carnegies, the Fords, the Vanderbilts. So even with a bad banking system, the titans of the Industrial Revolution built America into a superpower, much like Alexander Hamilton first envisions. But by 1907, the writing's on the wall, if not for the last-ditch desperate attempts of Rockefeller and Morgan to save banks in America, it is time to create a central bank. So from 1907 to 1911, the details were kind of hammered out, and then in 1913, President Woodrow Wilson, signs the Federal Reserve Act into law. And now we have a central bank, a banker's bank. And it is in charge of the banking system, of its member banks, and of the money supply. So throughout this unit, we are going to we're not going to do all of the roles of the Federal Reserve in one lesson. Throughout this unit, we are going to take a look at the various roles of the Federal Reserve, how it fulfills those roles, and for today, we're going to take a look at the most fundamental role about its stability over the American currency. So let's take a look at that now.